He moved into the neighborhood with one simple hope: peace. After years of noise, orders, stress, and constant alertness, he wanted quiet mornings, slow evenings, and a place where nothing demanded his attention anymore. The house was not big or fancy, but it was clean, solid, and paid for with years of sacrifice. It had a small yard, a driveway that fit one car, and a porch where he could sit and watch the day end. To him, that was more than enough. He kept his life simple. He woke up early not because he had to anymore, but because his body never forgot the habit. He made his coffee the same way every morning. He checked the weather. He watered the plants in his yard, even when they didn't really need it. Routine gave him comfort. It made the days feel steady and predictable, which was something he had missed for a long time. The neighborhood looked perfect from the outside. Neat lawns, matching mailboxes, clean sidewalks, and houses painted in approved colors. Everything followed rules. The community was managed by a homeowners association, something he had been told would protect property values and keep things orderly. He didn't care much about that. He just wanted to be left alone. At first, things were quiet. The neighbors waved politely, but didn't pry. People stayed to themselves. Cars moved slowly through the streets. No loud music. No chaos. It felt safe. For the first few weeks, he thought he had made the right choice. He spent his days fixing small things around the house. A loose step. A fence post that leaned a little too much. He didn't rush. He worked carefully, like every movement mattered. That was another habit he couldn't shake. Do it right the first time. Don't cut corners. On one clear afternoon, he raised a small flag near his porch. It wasn't flashy or oversized. It didn't block the sidewalk or bother anyone. It was simply meaningful to him. He stood back, adjusted it slightly, and nodded to himself. It felt right. That was the moment things began to change. Later that same day, a woman walked up his driveway without asking. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She walked with confidence, like the ground belonged to her. Her posture was stiff, her face tight with irritation even before she spoke. She stopped a few feet away and looked at the house, then the yard, then the flag. Our eyes narrowed. "Are you aware that this community has rules?" she asked. Her voice was sharp, not loud, but filled with the kind of tone that expected obedience. He turned toward her slowly. He took a second before responding the way he always did. Looked at her, then at the badge clipped to her shirt that showed she was part of the HOA. "I'm aware," he said calmly. She crossed her arms. "Then you should know that displays like that require approval." He glanced at the flag again. "It's not blocking anything. It's not the point," she replied. "Rules are rules." He nodded once. "If there's a problem, you can leave a notice." Her eyes widened slightly, surprised that he didn't immediately apologize or start explaining himself. "I don't need to leave a notice," she said. "I'm informing you now." He kept his voice steady. "All right, I'll look into it. It should have been the end of it. A simple exchange. Misunderstanding, maybe." But the way she looked at him suggested otherwise. There was disappointment in her expression, like she had expected a reaction and didn't get one. She turned and walked away without another word. That night, sat on his porch as the sun went down. The flag moved gently in the breeze, he thought. About the conversation, not with anger, but with confusion. He had followed the rules as best as he understood them. He wasn't trying to cause trouble. He had caused enough trouble in his life already, none of it by choice. The next morning, a notice was taped to his door. It was formal, printed, and cold. It stated that he was in violation of HOA guidelines, mentioned potential fines. It included a deadline. He read it carefully. Then he read it again. He didn't panic. He didn't rip it down. He folded it neatly and placed it on the table inside. He decided he would handle it the same way he handled everything else, calmly and correctly. He went online and searched through the HOA rules, page after page. Small text, complicated language. He took notes. He highlighted sections. He compared rules with what he had actually done. What he found didn't make sense. The rules were vague. Some sections contradicted others. There was nothing clear that stated his display was forbidden. There were guidelines, yes, but nothing that justified an immediate violation. Still, he decided to attend the next HOA meeting. The meeting was held in a small community room. Chairs were lined up in rows. A long table sat at the front where board members were seated. She was there, sitting straight, papers neatly stacked in front of her. When it was his turn to speak, he stood up slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse anyone. "I received a violation notice," he said. "I reviewed the guidelines, and I'm asking for clarification." She leaned forward before anyone else could respond. "The rules are clear," she said. He looked directly at her. "I don't believe they are." There was a brief silence in the room. She smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "If you don't like how we do things here, maybe this isn't the community for you." The words hung in the air. Something about that moment felt familiar to him. Not the place, not the people, but the feeling, the quiet threat, the assumption of power. The idea that someone could decide where he belonged. He took a breath. "I'm just asking for fair treatment," he said. The meeting moved on without addressing his concern. After that, the notices increased. A warning about his trash bin placement, a comment about his lawn length, a note about his car being parked too close to the curb, even though it wasn't. Each notice felt less about rules and more about pressure. Neighbors began avoiding eye contact. A few whispered apologies when they passed him on the sidewalk. One man quietly said, "She's been doing this for years." He realized then that he wasn't the first, but he might be the last person she expected to push back. He didn't react the way she wanted. He didn't yell. He didn't argue in public. He didn't break any rules. Instead, he documented everything: dates, times, photos, copies of notices. Late at night, he sometimes sat alone, staring at the papers spread across his table, not because he was afraid, but because he was disappointed. He had hoped for peace. Instead, he was being tested again, in a different way. Still, he reminded himself of one thing. He had faced far worse, and this time, he wasn't going anywhere. The days that followed felt heavier, even though nothing dramatic happened at first. It was the quiet pressure that changed everything. The kind of pressure that doesn't shout, but keeps tapping again and again until it gets inside your head. He continued his routine. Early mornings, coffee, a slow walk around the block. He nodded at people when he passed them. Some nodded back quickly. Others pretended to be busy with their phones or mailboxes. The neighborhood hadn't changed, but the way people behaved had. Another notice appeared on his door before the end of the week. This one mentioned the trash bins. According to the paper, they had been left out too long. He checked the time listed. It didn't match reality. It brought the bins in well before sunset. He knew that for a fact because he remembered the exact moment. He had just finished washing his mug when he saw the garbage truck turn the corner. He didn't argue with the paper. He added it to the folder. 2 days later, there was another notice. This time it was about weeds. He walked into his yard and looked carefully. There were no weeds. The grass was trimmed. The edges were clean. He even took photos from different angles, not because he felt defensive, but because he felt prepared. That night, he sent a polite email to the HOA office. Short sentences. No emotion, just facts. He attached photos and asked for clarification. The reply came the next day. It was brief, cold. It didn't address his points. It simply stated that further violations could result in fines. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the screen for a long time. Not angry, just tired. He had known stress before, real stress. The kind that doesn't allow sleep. The kind that tightens your chest and sharpens your senses. Compared to that, this felt small. But it was persistent. Persistence could wear anyone down. A few neighbors started talking quietly when he was nearby. He overheard parts of conversations. She's after him now. Once she starts, she doesn't stop. One older woman finally spoke to him while they both waited at the mailbox. "You should just comply," she said softly. "It's easier." He looked at her kindly. Easier isn't always right. She nodded, but didn't say anything else. The woman from the HOA appeared again a few days later. This time she didn't come alone. Another board member stood a few steps behind her, silent, arms crossed. She pointed toward the side of his house. "Your fence color is not approved," He followed her gaze. The fence had been there when he bought the house. It hasn't been changed, he said. That doesn't matter, she replied. It's still a violation. He paused. So why wasn't it an issue before? She tilted her head slightly. We're reviewing properties more carefully now. The words felt rehearsed. He nodded once. I'll need that in writing. Her expression tightened. You'll receive a notice. Another one was added to the folder. The fines started soon after. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. Each notice came with a deadline and a warning. The tone grew more threatening. Still, he didn't react. Instead, he read more. HOA laws, local regulations, homeowner rights. He learned which rules were enforceable and which were not. He learned how often inspections were allowed. He learned that selective enforcement was a serious issue. He wasn't planning revenge. He was planning clarity. One afternoon, as he returned from the store, he found his car had been tagged with a warning sticker. It claimed the vehicle was improperly parked. He stood there quietly for a moment, groceries in his hands. The sticker flapping slightly in the breeze. That was the first time. Frustration showed on his face. He peeled the sticker off slowly and placed it in the folder. That evening, he knocked on a few doors. Not to complain, just to ask, have you ever received notices like this? He asked one neighbor. The man hesitated, then sighed. Yes, a few years back. I paid the fines just to make it stop, another neighbor said. She cited me for my porch light once. Said it was the wrong shade. Each story sounded different. But the pattern was the same. He realized then that this wasn't personal anymore. It was systematic. The next HOA meeting was louder than the last. He brought copies of everything. He waited his turn. When he stood, his hands didn't shake. I want to address selective enforcement, he said. Murmurs filled the room. The woman rolled her eyes. You're being dramatic. He didn't respond to her directly. He spoke to the room. I've documented multiple violations issued without cause. I've confirmed similar treatment with other residents. One person cleared their throat. Another nodded. The board president tried to move on. But a few residents spoke up. I got fined for something that didn't apply to me either. Did one? The woman's face hardened. This meeting is not the place for complaints. She snapped. He looked at her calmly. Then where is? She stood up. If you continue disrupting this community, there will be consequences. The word consequences echoed in his mind. He had heard that word before, in different contexts, with far more weight behind it. After the meeting, a man approached him quietly. Be careful, he said. She has friends in places. He nodded. So do I. That night, he organized his documents again. He labeled everything. He made digital copies. He backed them up. He wasn't angry anymore. He was focused. The next notice arrived, sooner than expected. This one accused him of harassment. He read it slowly. Disbelief mixing with something darker. Harassment. For attending meetings, for asking questions, for existing. He closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. This was no longer about compliance. This was about control. And control only works on people who are afraid. He placed the notice in the folder, closed it carefully, and set it down. Outside, the neighborhood looked the same as always. Clean, quiet, orderly. But beneath that calm surface, something had shifted. The pressure was building, and the woman who started it all had no idea how close she was to crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The shift didn't happen loudly. There was no argument, no dramatic moment where everything changed at once. It happened quietly inside him, the way real decisions usually do. He stopped, hoping the situation would fix itself. Every morning he still woke up early. He still made his coffee. But now, after sitting down at the table, he opened his laptop instead of the newspaper. He reviewed notes, laws, messages. He treated it like a mission, not a fight. He stopped reacting and started preparing. The notices kept coming, but now he read them differently. Not as threats, but as evidence. He noted the dates, the wording, the tone. He noticed patterns. Certain days, certain times. Almost always after she had driven through the neighborhood, he began using his phone more often. Not to scroll, but to record. Short clips, photos, voice memos right after interactions. While details were still clear in his mind, one afternoon he was trimming the edge of his lawn when she approached again. This time, she didn't even pretend to be polite. "You're still out of compliance," she said. He didn't stop what he was doing. "With what?" "Multiple things," she replied. "Your attitude, for one." He turned the trimmer off and faced her. "My attitude?" he asked calmly. "You're being difficult on purpose," she said. "This community runs on cooperation." He nodded. "Then cooperation goes both ways." Her face flushed. "You don't get to lecture me." "I'm not," he said. "I'm asking for fairness." She stepped closer. Too close. "I can make your life very uncomfortable here," she said quietly. He looked at her without blinking. "I'm already uncomfortable." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she walked away, clearly frustrated. He opened the Notes app and recorded exactly what had just happened. That evening, he contacted a veterans support organization. Not to complain, but to ask questions. About rights. About resources. About what to do when authority is abused. They listened. One person told him, "Document everything. Never raise your voice. Let them make the mistake." That advice felt familiar. Days later, a certified letter arrived. It claimed he had failed to pay outstanding fines and that legal action could follow. He checked his records. He had already disputed the fines in writing. According to the rules, enforcement should have been paused, but it wasn't. He realized then that she wasn't just pushing boundaries. She was ignoring procedure entirely. That mattered. He responded with a formal letter, clear, professional, no emotion. He cited specific sections of the bylaws and local regulations. He requested proof. He requested a hearing. The response took longer than usual. In the meantime, something unexpected happened. A few neighbors began speaking up. One man stopped him during an evening walk. "I saw what she said to you the other day," he admitted. That wasn't right. Another left a note in his mailbox. No name. Just a sentence. "You're not alone." Didn't smile. But he felt steadier at the next HOA meeting. The room was more crowded than usual. She sat at the front, posture stiff, eyes scanning the room. When it was his turn to speak, he stood slowly, holding a folder thicker than before. "I requested a hearing regarding disputed fines," he said. The board president looked uncomfortable. "We'll need to review." She already denied it, he said calmly. Her head snapped toward him. "That's not true." He opened the folder and held up a printed email. "This is..." A murmur spread through the room. He continued, voice steady. "According to our bylaws, enforcement pauses during disputes." That didn't happen. Someone in the back said, "That happened to me too." She slammed her hand on the table. "This meeting is out of control." He looked at the board, not at her. "All I'm asking is that the rules be followed." Silence followed. The board president cleared his throat. "We'll take this under advisement." She stared at him as he sat down, eyes cold. After the meeting, she confronted him in the parking lot. "You think you're smart?" she said. "I think I'm patient," he replied. "You're making enemies," she warned. He paused before opening his car door. "I already had enemies once. This isn't that." Her jaw tightened. She walked away. The following week, inspections increased. Almost daily, he welcomed them. He filmed quietly. From his porch. From inside his home. He made sure everything was visible. Everything was calm. Then came the mistake. One afternoon, she entered his yard without notice. Without permission. He was inside and saw her through the window, walking near his porch. Pointing her phone at his house, he stepped outside. "You can't be here," he said. "I can inspect common areas," she replied. "This isn't a common area," he said calmly. "This is my property." She waved him off. Don't start. He raised his phone. I'm recording. Her expression changed. You don't have permission to record me, she snapped. I don't need it, he said. I'm on my property. She stepped closer again. Turn that off. No, he said. That was the moment she lost control. She raised her voice. She accused him of intimidation. She threatened to call authorities. He stood still, silent, recording, when she finally left. He saved the video in 3 different places. That night he watched it once. Just once. The line had been crossed. Not emotionally, legally. He reached out to a legal aid group the next morning. They reviewed everything. One of them said quietly, "This is serious." He nodded. I know. He wasn't angry. He wasn't scared. He was ready. Outside, the neighborhood remained quiet. Lawns trimmed. Streets clean, but behind closed doors, a record was building. And the woman who believed she held all the power had just handed him exactly what he needed. The response didn't come right away. And that silence said more than any letter ever could. Days passed without a notice, without an email, without anyone showing up to inspect his yard. The sudden calm felt unnatural, like the quiet just before a storm. He didn't relax. He didn't assume anything had improved. He stayed steady. Every document remained organized. Every file backed up. Every message saved. He kept living his life. But now there was purpose in every small action. He went for his morning walks and noticed more people greeting him. Some stopped to talk. Not long conversations, but enough to show support. I saw what happened. One woman said softly as she adjusted her grocery bags. I didn't say anything then. I should have. He shook his head. You're saying something now? Another neighbor quietly offered copies of their old notices. In case it helps, he said. It did help. The legal aid group moved carefully. They didn't rush. They asked for timelines, confirmations, and proof. He gave them everything. No exaggeration. No emotion. Just facts. They explained what would happen next. Formal complaints would be filed. The HOA would be required to respond. Records would be requested. Meetings would be documented. Accountability was no longer optional. When the first official letter arrived at the HOA office, it changed the atmosphere instantly. She felt it. He didn't see her for a while after that. No drive-bys. No surprise visits. No taped notices. But the pressure returned in a different form. An emergency HOA meeting was announced. The notice was slipped into mailboxes. Late in the evening with little explanation, just a date, a time. Mandatory attendance encouraged. He knew what that meant. The room was full when he arrived. More full than he had ever seen it. People stood along the walls. Some whispered. Some looked nervous. Others looked determined. She sat at the front again, but something about her posture had changed. The confidence was still there, but it looked forced. Like she was holding it together through effort instead of habit. The meeting began with routine statements. But no one was listening. Everyone was waiting. Then the board president cleared his throat. We've received formal complaints regarding enforcement practices, he said. The room went quiet. She shifted in her seat. These complaints allege selective enforcement, procedural violations, and misconduct. A few people gasped quietly. She stood up. This is ridiculous. One disgruntled homeowner he didn't interrupt. He didn't even look at her. The president raised a hand. We will hear from residents. That was the moment everything changed. One by one. People stood. A man spoke about fines that never made. Since a woman described being threatened over her window. Decorations, another admitted he paid. Thousands just to avoid conflict. Each story was calm, measured, honest. She tried to interrupt several times, but the room no longer belonged to her when it was his turn. He stood slowly. I asked for fairness, he said. I documented responses. I followed procedure. I was ignored. He held up the video stills, the emails, the letters. This isn't personal, he added. It's about process. The silence that followed was heavy. The board announced an independent review. She didn't speak after that. Over the next few weeks, things unraveled quickly. Financial act. Records were requested. Inspection logs were examined. Emails were recovered. Patterns emerged. The same names. The same timing. The same aggressive language she was placed on. Temporary leave from enforcement duties that alone sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. She didn't take it quietly. She sent emails accusing people of betrayal. She claimed bias. She blamed him directly. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The review continued. Another meeting was called, this time with legal representatives present. The room felt different. Less emotional. More serious. Findings were read aloud. Violations of procedure. Failure to pause enforcement. During disputes, unauthorized entry onto private property, misuse of authority, she stood up once more. Voice shaking now. "I was just doing my job," a board member replied quietly. "Your job had limits." That was it. Her authority was revoked. The room didn't erupt in cheers. There was no celebration, just a collective exhale. People left quietly, some with tears in their eyes. Outside, a few neighbors stopped him. "Thank you," one said. He nodded. "We all did this." That night, he sat on his porch again. The same chair, the same view, the flag moved gently in the breeze. For the first time in months, his shoulders felt lighter. He knew part 5 would bring closure, but this part was about truth and truth. Once spoken clearly, doesn't disappear. The neighborhood didn't change overnight, but it changed in ways that mattered. The streets were still quiet. Lawns were still trimmed. Mailboxes still lined the sidewalks in perfect rows. From the outside, everything looked the same. But underneath that calm surface, something important had shifted. People walked a little slower now. They talked a little more. Doors stayed open longer in the evenings. Neighbors who had avoided eye contact before now stopped to chat. Even if it was just for a minute. He noticed it on his morning walks. Someone waved from across the street. Another asked how he was doing and actually waited for the answer. Small things, but meaningful ones. The HOA sent out a letter to the entire community. It explained that new procedures were being put in place. Enforcement rules would be reviewed. Complaints would be handled by more than one person. Inspections would require notice. Disputes would pause penalties, as they always should have. There was no apology with his name on it. He didn't expect one. What mattered was that the behavior had stopped. The woman who once controlled everything was gone from her position. She moved away not long after. Some said she left quietly. Others said she blamed everyone but herself. He didn't follow the details. He didn't need to. The pressure was gone, for the first time in a long while. He felt like he could breathe fully again. One evening, a few neighbors gathered near his porch. They didn't come to celebrate. They came to talk. "I was scared," one admitted. "I thought if I spoke up, she'd come after me harder." He nodded. "That fear keeps things broken," another said. "You didn't yell. You didn't threaten. You just stayed steady." He smiled slightly. "That's how you outlast bad systems." They stayed for a while, sharing stories, laughing softly. When they left, the night felt warmer somehow. Days turned into weeks. No notices appeared on his door. No surprise inspections. No warning stickers. His folder stayed closed on the shelf, but he didn't throw it away. Not out of bitterness. Out of respect for what it represented, one afternoon he took it down and flipped through it one last time. The letters, the photos, the records, then he placed it back. He returned to his routines. Coffee walks, small repairs around the house. Sitting on the porch at sunset, the flag still stood where it always had. One day, a young couple moved into a house nearby. They looked nervous, unsure, still learning how things worked. He walked over and introduced himself. "Don't worry," he said gently. "It's a good place." And this time it was true. At the next HOA meeting, the room felt different. less tense, more open. People asked questions without fear. Board members listened instead of interrupting. When someone mentioned fairness, heads nodded. No one argued. On the walk home, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Closure, not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind that settles in slowly and stays. He didn't see himself as a hero. He never did. He just knew what it felt like to be pushed too far. And he knew what it took to stand still when pressure tried to move you. He had learned long ago. Strength wasn't about force. It was about control. Control over reactions. Control over fear. Control over when to act and when to wait. That lesson had served him before. It served him again here. One evening, as the sun dipped low, he sat on his porch and listened to the quiet. Not the tense quiet from before, but a peaceful one. A neighbor walked past and said, "Thank you again." He nodded. "Take care of the place." "I will," the neighbor replied. The breeze moved through the trees. The flag shifted gently. Nothing demanded his attention. Nothing threatened his peace. The battle was over. Not because someone lost, but because fairness finally won. And that was enough. Some people never expect resistance. They mistake silence for weakness. They confuse authority with power. But sometimes, the wrong person gets pushed. And sometimes, the quiet ones are the strongest. The neighborhood settled into its new rhythm, and he finally had what he came. For peace, life didn't suddenly turn perfect, but it became lighter in ways that were easy to feel. The kind of lightness that lets you wake up without tension in your chest. The kind that allows silence to feel comforting instead of heavy. He noticed it most in the mornings. He still woke up early, but now he stayed in bed a few extra minutes, listening to the quiet. No knock on the door. No envelope taped to the handle. No sense that someone was watching, waiting for a mistake. He made his coffee and sat by the window. Sunlight came through without interruption. For months, that simple moment had been clouded by thoughts of what might happen next. Now his mind stayed calm. The neighborhood slowly adjusted to its new reality. People were still careful, but not afraid. Conversations happened more naturally. Small gatherings began again. Someone organized a casual cleanup day, not because the HOA demanded it, but because residents wanted to take care of their shared space together. He joined them quietly. No speeches, no attention, just work. A man working beside him said, "Things feel different now." He nodded. "Because people aren't being pushed anymore." The man smiled. "You helped with that?" He didn't respond. Compliments had never sat comfortably with him. The new HOA board sent out surveys, asking residents what they wanted changed. For the first time, answers mattered. Rules were rewritten in plain language. Enforcement roles were limited. Transparency became more than just a word. At one meeting, someone suggested creating a committee to protect residents from unfair treatment. The idea passed without resistance. He sat in the back listening. Someone turned and asked, "Would you like to be part of it?" He thought for a moment. "Not right now," he said. "But I'll help if you need me." That was enough. One afternoon, he found himself walking past the community room where everything had once felt so tense. He paused, remembering the nights he had stood there with his folder. Unsure how things would end, he realized. Something then, the hardest part hadn't been the fines or the threats. It had been staying calm when it would have been easier to react. That skill didn't come from nowhere. It had been shaped long ago, under pressure far greater than this. Pressure that taught him how important control really was. He didn't regret the fight. But he was glad it was over. Weeks passed. Then months, new families moved in. They were welcomed without suspicion. No one whispered warnings anymore. The community slowly built trust again, brick by brick. One evening, a young man knocked on his door. He looked nervous. "I heard what you did," the man said. "I just wanted to say thank you." He nodded. "Take care of yourself here." "I will," the man replied. After the door closed, sat down and reflected on how easily power can be misused when no one questions it. how silence can protect the wrong people, how standing still, refusing to be pushed, can sometimes change everything. He didn't believe every battle needed to be fought, but some moments mattered. This had been one of them. On a quiet evening, he packed away a few old papers he no longer needed. Among them were copies of emails and notices that once caused sleepless nights. He shredded them slowly, one page at a time. Not because he wanted to forget, but because he no longer needed proof. Outside, the streetlights came on. Children laughed somewhere down the block. A dog barked once, then settled. He stepped onto his porch and took a deep breath. Peace wasn't something given, it was something protected. And sometimes, the cost of protecting it was simply refusing to move when someone tried to push you aside. He sat down, watched the night settle in, and let the quiet stay exactly where it belonged. Time has a quiet way of proving what really matters, as weeks turned into months. The story that once felt heavy slowly became something people talked about less and less. Not because it was forgotten, but because it no longer controlled anyone's daily life. The neighborhood had moved forward, and that itself felt like a victory. He noticed that his days no longer revolved around caution. He no longer checked the door twice before stepping outside. He no longer felt the urge to document every small detail. The habit had faded naturally, replaced by a sense of normal life returning. Normal had never felt so valuable. One morning, while watering his plants, he realized he had gone several days without thinking about the past conflict at all. The thought surprised him. For so long, it had lived quietly in the back of his mind. Now it felt distant, like something that belonged to another version of his life. A neighbor stopped by to talk, leaning casually against the fence. "Things are calmer," the neighbor said. He nodded. Calm usually comes after people learn limits. The neighbor smiled. "You've taught a lot of people that." He shrugged. "People learn when they're ready." There was no bitterness left in his voice, just acceptance. The HOA continued changing in small but meaningful ways. Notices became rare. When they did appear, they were respectful and clear. Questions were answered instead of dismissed. Meetings felt less like confrontations and more like conversations. For the first time, the rules actually felt like they served the community instead of controlling it. He attended fewer meetings now, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't need to be there. Things were running the way they should have from the start. One evening, as he sat on his porch watching the sky darken, he thought about how easily situations like this could have ended differently. If he had raised his voice, if he had reacted out of anger, if he had chosen force instead of patience, none of those paths would have led to peace. He understood something many people never do. Strength is often quiet. It shows up as restraint, as consistency, as the ability to wait while others rush. That understanding didn't come from books or speeches. It came from experience. A family moved in across the street, with children who laughed loudly and rode bikes up and down the sidewalk. Some might have complained about the noise. He didn't. He smiled instead. Life was happening, and that was a good thing. One afternoon, he received a handwritten note in his mailbox. It wasn't from the HOA. It was from a neighbor he barely knew. The note simply said, "Thank you for standing when the rest of us couldn't." He read it once, folded it carefully, and placed it in a drawer. That note mattered more than any official apology ever could. As the seasons changed, the neighborhood took on new energy. People planted gardens together. Someone organized evening walks. A small book exchange appeared near the sidewalk. Built by volunteers, these things had nothing to do with rules. They had everything to do with trust. He continued living quietly, not seeking attention or recognition. But people noticed him in a different way now. Not with fear or curiosity, but with respect. Not because he demanded it, but because he earned it. One evening, during a casual conversation, someone asked him why he never seemed angry during everything that happened. He thought about the question for a moment. "Anger burns fast," he said. "But patience lasts." That was the truth. Late one night, as he prepared for bed, he paused at the window and looked out at the street. The lights glowed softly. Everything felt steady. This was what he had hoped for when he first moved in. Not perfection, just peace. He knew that challenges would come again someday, in some form, in some place. Life always finds a way to test people, but he also knew this. He didn't need to prove himself anymore. He had already done that. By choosing calm over chaos, fairness over fear, and dignity over ego. The story didn't end with applause or headlines. It ended with something better. A quiet neighborhood, a clear conscience, and a man finally at rest in the place he chose to call home. The story didn't end the way most people expected. There was no big celebration, no public apology broadcasted to everyone, no moment where someone stood up and said all the perfect words. Instead, the ending arrived slowly, quietly, the way real life often does. Months passed, and with each passing week, the memory of tension faded a little more. Not because it didn't matter anymore, but because it no longer had power. The neighborhood settled into something honest. Not perfect, but fair. He continued living the way he always had. Early mornings, simple meals, long walks when the air felt right. He took his time with things now. There was no reason to rush. Sometimes, while walking past familiar houses, he noticed small changes. A porch light replaced without fear of complaint. A car parked, slightly crooked, left alone. A child's chalk drawings on the sidewalk, untouched. These were signs of something deeper than rule changes. They were signs of relief. One afternoon, he sat on his porch as a light rain began to fall. He didn't go inside right away. He let the drops hit the railing, listened to the soft sound they made. For a long time, even rain had felt like something to endure instead of enjoy. Now, it was just rain. A neighbor walked by and waved. Another stopped to talk about nothing important at all. Whether a new store opening nearby. Simple talk. That simplicity felt earned. The HOA continued operating, but with less presence. Notices became rare and respectful. When someone had a concern, it was handled through conversation instead of threats. Meetings were shorter, quieter, productive. People learned that control wasn't the same as care. One evening, he received a letter from the HOA board. Not a notice. Not a warning. Just a letter. It thanked residents for their patience during changes. It mentioned the importance of transparency and respect. It encouraged communication instead of conflict. There was no mention of the past, by name, but the meaning was clear. He folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, next to a few personal things he kept safe. It didn't feel like a victory trophy. It felt like closure. Later that week, a small gathering took place in the community space. Nothing official. Just neighbors, sharing food, sitting together, talking freely. He stood near the back at first, content to observe. Someone waved him over. "Come sit," they said. He did. Stories were shared. Some were light. Some carried weight. A few people spoke about how close they had been to moving away, how powerless they had felt. How different things felt now. No one pointed fingers, no one raised voices. The conversation stayed grounded. At one point, someone said quietly, all it took was one person refusing to be pushed. He didn't respond, not because he disagreed, but because he understood that moments like this weren't about credit, they were about learning as time moved on. He became something he never planned to be, a reference point. New residents heard his story in pieces, passed along casually. Not exaggerated, not dramatic. Just honest. They learned that fairness mattered, that patience could be powerful. That silence didn't always mean weakness. He never corrected anyone. He never added details. The truth didn't need polishing. One morning, while cleaning out a drawer, he found the folder again. The one that once held everything. He opened it. The pages felt thinner now. Less heavy. He didn't reread them all. He didn't need to. He took a deep breath and removed the last remaining papers. Slowly, carefully, he shredded them. not out of anger, out of release. Outside, the sound of life carried on. Cars passing, voices drifting. A lawnmower starting somewhere nearby. Normal sounds, healthy sounds. He stepped out onto his porch and sat down, watching the day unfold. He thought about how easily power can grow unchecked when people are afraid, how systems can quietly drift away from their purpose. How important it is for someone to stand firm. Without becoming hard, that balance mattered. Standing. Up without turning cold, resisting without becoming cruel. He had walked that line carefully, and it had made all the difference. Weeks later, a community update announced that leadership roles would rotate regularly. Oversight committees were formed. Clear limits were set. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. One evening, as the sun lowered and the sky turned soft shades of orange and gray, he sat quietly and reflected on everything that had happened, not with pride, not with regret. With understanding, life had tested him again, just in a different way this time. Instead of noise and danger, it tested his patience. Instead of survival, it tested his restraint. He passed both, not because he fought, but because he didn't lose himself. The neighborhood, lights came on one by one. Windows glowed warmly. The world felt settled. He leaned back in his chair and closed. His eyes for a moment, peace had returned, not loudly but completely, and that, more than anything else, made the entire journey worth it.